Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the brand new album from the Fray, titled Helios. But first, let me take you back a few years. See, back in the mid-2000s, the Billboard Hot 100 charts, they were in a very weird place. Southern crunk was deteriorating rapidly, indie rock briefly exploded before fizzling out, pop punk and the newest incarnation of emo were tearing up the charts, and pop music itself was in a very weird place, either coasting off of some slinky R&B in the vein of Justin Timberlake or early Rihanna, or with crossovers from other genres, like Gwen Stefani building her very short-lived solo career away from No Doubt, or say Nelly Furtado selling out to work with Timbaland and actually making better music for her trouble. And it was in this period that a series of bands discovered that they could churn out hits, making soft, introspective, middle-brow material with just a hint of a rock edge. And in 2006, we got the deluge of bands some enterprising critics deemed Dawson's Creek rock. Now you know the genre, songs that are just perfectly inoffensive enough to be played over long, meditative montages where James Van Der Beek wistfully stares off into the distance and cries about something or other. And in 2006, we got the motherlode, with Daniel Powter's Bad Day topping the Billboard Hot 100 year-end chart of that year. And then there's a whole slew of other acts that came out of the woodwork, like Five for Fighting, James Blunt, the commercial success of Coldplay, Snow Patrol, and even others surging up the charts. Hell, even Nickelback tried to go in this genre with Savin' Me and Far Away before reverting back to their typical brand of meat-headed mediocrity. And to be fair, as much as I like to make fun of this genre, there was some quality here, with Snow Patrol always being the best of the genre, and I have to admit that I wish the boom had lasted a little bit longer and given adult alternative acts at least a little bit more staying power before the genre practically evaporated overnight with the club boom, with only a few very sad exceptions. And among the list of bands to explode in 2006 was the Fray, a band I only find remarkable because of how incredibly accessible they were. Not enough of a brawny edge to fall into post-grunge, yet not soft enough to be dismissed as easy-listening schlock. The Fray had a smash hit with their debut album, How to Save a Life, despite the fact that it wasn't that good and hasn't exactly aged well. Critics have never been kind to the Fray, and there's a very good reason for that. When you try so damn hard to please a wide audience, you end up losing some unique identity yourself. And while I tended to like some of their more melodic focus in comparison with most critics, I've never been fond of Isaac Slade's vocals. I've always found the guitars lacking in texture, and the lyrics have always teetered on the line between being overly earnest and kind of endearing in a cheesy way to borderline parody, something that you would see the Lonely Island make. In any case, the Fray hit something of a stumbling block with their second self-titled album, mostly because it was playing in the same wheelhouse with somehow worse lyrics. And after recording a cover of Kanye West's Heartless that completely missed the point, I had assumed that their careers were effectively over. But it turns out in 2012 they put out a third album, Scars and Stones. And while the Fray were touting their ability to stay together and work together as a team and as a band, I was seriously wondering whether or not they had forgotten their strengths in the meantime. At this point, the lyrics were borderline token, Slade's falsetto was painfully weak, and the good melodies had been subsumed under flat, boring guitar lines that were trying to sound big in the U2 vein, but had none of the personality. At this point, I assumed that anybody who was still listening to the Fray had just picked up Fallen Empires by Snow Patrol and had put the Fray out of their minds forever, because that's pretty much what I did. Well, it actually turns out the Fray have a new album with a new single that actually charted that sounded nothing like the Fray that I previously knew. So out of sheer curiosity, I picked up their newest album, Helios. Was this the shift in direction that the Fray needed to stay relevant? Well, you can't say they don't try. They're damnedest to make it work. And honestly, oh look, I don't want to thrash this album. Believe it or not, I don't like handing out reviews that are arguably negative, especially when it's evident how hard the act is really trying to sound good. But unfortunately, I'm also a critic who has to say that Helios by the Fray is not a good album. It's by no means the worst thing I've ever heard, or anything even that I've heard this year, but it's a profoundly confused, hyper-earnest, yet poorly executed and articulated work that eventually devolves into a gigantic, incomprehensible mess. What's even more frustrating is I get the feeling that the band, they don't really understand their strengths as an act, which leads to several misfires on this album that at least had the potential to sound good and work well. So, okay, let's give the instrumentation and the production talks a little bit, and I'll give the Fray this. And they've always had a knack for crafting a pretty catchy hook, if not a good melody. Now, this comes from a band that's primarily driven by piano melodies. And whenever the band moves away from that, they tend to run into problems. Their best experiment away from that sound on this album was the lead single Love Don't Die, which sounds like a Black Keys song minus the texture or killer melody, but I gotta be honest, their stab at disco and Give It Away and their mid-period Killers riff and Shadow and a Dancer, they feel token at best. They really don't feel like they push that experimentation far enough. The problem comes in that the melodies on these tracks are often so basic and rudimentary that they lose presence, and sadly they start feeling interchangeable. And the lack of distinctive texture in the instrumentation really doesn't help matters. Now, considering how hard the production is trying to crank everything up to 11 for a borderline stadium rock vibe, then you can tell that the Fray, they're trying to go broad. They're trying to capture those big, heartfelt emotions. And you know what? It's really the best fit for their deadly serious earnestness that comes out in every song. I mean, when you have gospel choirs and backing choruses coming out in multiple songs in a big way, and your drum production is this prominent and clean, you're making your intentions pretty clear. And like with their last album, you can tell that more than a few glances were taken at acts that were successful in this vein, like U2 or Coldplay. But the problem here with that is that those bands knew that 4 bars of hook, they weren't enough to sustain a grand, epic, crowd-pleasing song, which leaves a lot of the Fray's newest music, even stuff that fit within their wheelhouse, feel really oddly weightless. It doesn't have a lot of impact with me at all. Now, I'll admit, part of the problem is Isaac Slade. Look, I'm not a fan of his vocals. They're nasal, his falsetto is unimpressive, and his howling rasp doesn't exactly have a lot of emotional range. But it was on Helios where I realized the big problem that I have with him, because Slade actually does have some emotional range and even charisma, but he's a terrible fit for the sort of music that the Fray makes. Compare him to Chris Martin of Coldplay, or Gary Lightbody from Snow Patrol, or Dan Reynolds from Imagine Dragons, or even Bono. These are guys who could sell that sincerity and make it carry deeper weight and meaning. But the tone of Slade's voice is better suited for a more sour, bitter, darker emotional spectrum, maybe in, say, a post-grunge vein or an alternative metal vein. But whenever he's singing this more uplifting style of material, he just comes across a little bit too humorless and harsh, and I don't get sucked up into the emotion that he's trying to convey in the song. And look, the songwriting really doesn't help matters here. And as much as I don't like doing this, I'm gonna have to join in with the rest of the critics and say that the Fray, they've never been good songwriters. They are a shockingly blunt band when it comes to their technical songwriting, and the exaggerated nature of their songs doesn't exactly lend itself well to nuance or anything close to subtlety. Take Love Don't Die, a song about reaffirming commitment that rapidly moves into ludicrous hyperbole. Maybe it's just me, but I feel the same way about this song that I do about Christina Perri's lackluster song 1,000 Years. When you start throwing around the word 1,000 to describe how long your love will last, you're either in a parody of this kind of song or you're in a Twilight movie. And then you have Our Last Days and Wherever This Goes, songs that are trying to read from the Springsteen playbook, but have nowhere near the texture or flavor or even coherency to back their claims up to Born to Run. And this is not counting the places where the songwriter just comes into downright terrible regions or just gets plain weird. Take Break Your Plans, a song sung to an ex that begins with the lyric, "I wish I had cheated, at least that's a reason," and then spends the entire chorus telling her, or trying to tell her, to break up her plans for me tonight. If you place cheating on the table as a legitimate reason why the relationship could have ended, and then you want her to change her plans, likely with another guy, for you, I've got nothing positive to say about that particular brand of selfishness. Or take Closer to Me, a song where Isaac Slade goes into detail about all the criminal elements about his personality, how he's a guy on the run with dirty money. And then he asks the girl, "Won't you come a bit closer to me?" Why? And no. What's even worse is that the Fray are trying to make it come across as romantic in the bad boy vein, and I'm like, okay, fine. But the earnestness of the presentation makes it completely unconvincing. And let's face it, the Fray as a band have never exactly come across as convincing bad boys. I don't know how they potentially could. Now look, I'm not saying that this album is bad. There's a few songs that I even kind of like. Hold My Hand, a song about dealing with upcoming death from an old man's perspective, or Hurricane, your standard wild girl song. You know what, those songs, they're not bad. But the rest of this album is just either forgettable or just not worth your time at all. If Helios reflects anything about the Fray as a band, it shows that they have no idea where they want to take this act, and instead chosen to hop onto bandwagons in the hopes that their singles might manage to gain some traction on mainstream radio. In other words, given the more sterile than ever production and focus on hooks over good songwriting or melody, they sold out. Sorry for saying it, but it's true. In the end, as a former apologist for this band, I'm giving this record a 5 out of 10, and only a recommendation if you find the songwriting or instrumentation emotionally compelling in some very broad way. I certainly don't, but if you do, fine, go for it. Otherwise, do what everybody else did and put the Fray to the back of your mind where they belong. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine there's going to be some of you Fray fans who are going to come out of the woodwork and be very, very angry with me about this. Sorry guys, just if they made better music, I would be much more supportive of them. And heck, I liked that first album even when most critics really didn't. It happens. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums coming out this year that you'd like me to cover in the next couple of weeks, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. So until then, see you next time.